Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Mission Dharma. Once again, I'm David Lewis. I've been here before. Some of you know me. Happy to be here again. Thinking good thoughts about Howie tonight. Sending him a lot of love and metta. Howie's doing okay. I can't tell you much. He's came home after just one night in the hospital after surgery. The surgery was successful. He spent one night in the hospital and he's healing now, healing and recovering. And he plans to be here next week. And to tell the truth, that's all I can tell you because I don't know. I don't have any details beyond that. And even if I did, I don't think it's my place to tell. So hopefully Howie will tell all when he's back next week. But the important thing is that he's okay, and he really appreciates. I haven't spoken to him, but we've swapped emails. He appreciates all the good thoughts and love and care and that he's been getting from all over the country. His many sanghas, including this one. So let's honor Howie tonight by sharing a meditation together. And perhaps honoring yourself for giving yourself this opportunity for take a break. Take a break from the worries of the day, the anxiety of the news, anything that might be going on in your life or anything that's going on in the world that seems problematic or whatever. Just let that fall away for now. And check into the reality of the present moment. Because the only time we're actually experiencing reality, and that's my theme tonight, is in the present moment. We experience reality through our six sense doors: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and cognizing. Might have missed one. So any of those present moment experiences are good meditation objects. You can't go wrong. We often talk about using the sense of touch. That's the one I missed, touch. Sense of touch or the sense of hearing to ground ourselves in the present moment. But it's also true for smelling and taste and cognizing. Cognizing is a Buddhist addition to the list of the sense doors. It doesn't mean thinking, as it does in English. Cognizing in Buddhism is just noticing thoughts arising and passing away in the same way that sounds arise and pass away, just in the blink of an eye. Thinking happens when we get attached to thoughts. And that generally carries us off into the past or the future, which is not real, not as real as the present moment. So let's try to be present this evening, present with our direct experience of the six sense doors, whatever's going on. Feel free to start your meditation with a deep breath or two if that brings you into your body a little bit more, and let go. Let go of any idea that something special should be happening or not happening. Letting go of wanting anything in particular to happen. And simply receiving our experience just as it is. It's often useful to start out following the breath to bring us into our body, but that just reminds us we're in a body, and we can shift our attention to the sense of touch, feeling of sitting in a chair or on a cushion with your feet on the floor, your hands touching wherever they're touching. Your body is fully present. The mind might wander away, but the body is fully present. So if you get lost in meditation, the mind drifts away or gets caught up in some story, simply invite your attention back into the body, whether it be the sense of touch or sound or your breath. Sometimes unexpected sounds during meditation are helpful. They bring us right back into the present moment. They wake us up. Because every time we come back to the present, it's a moment of awakening. Awakening to the here and now. And in the present moment, just using the information of our six sense doors, there are no problems. So just take a moment to grok that. Simply using the information of your sense doors, what's the problem in this moment? This is a piece that you can always tap into. It's always available to you. Simply by relaxing, perhaps shutting the eyes, and receiving your experience, whatever's up for you. If you're experiencing any aches or pains or some sort of discomfort, try to relax around it if you can. And if it doesn't fade away, just acknowledge it's like this. I'm experiencing this right now. Knowing that, like all other phenomena, it's likely to change. Simply accepting our experience without judging, without trying to control anything at all. Whatever you're experiencing right now is like this. And perhaps feeling a little gratitude for the opportunity to be present. Because for many of us, during the course of a busy day in everyday life, we lose track of the present moment. We spend so much of our time leaning into the future or dwelling in the past or worrying about the news or some issue in our lives. And yet, when we're fully present, there are no problems. just this experience. As you settle into your seat, the breath may start to calm. And you may start noticing thoughts arising and passing away. Thoughts are not a problem in meditation. We can receive them just like we receive sounds. They arise, they pass away of their own volition, uninvited. It's just part of the parade of experience. Just let them be, as if you were sitting by a river. Thoughts and bodily sensations, sounds are like leaves and sticks floating down the river past our attention. Everything flowing peacefully, but constantly changing. The river of phenomena is a mighty experience, but it's always changing. And we can just relax into that. Just allow it to flow. No need to go fishing. And breathe. Feeling the body relax. Experiencing the relief of letting go. And gratitude for this practice. So continue practicing like this, in whatever way works best for you. And I'll ring a bell at the end of the meditation. If the mind has wandered, not a problem. Simply notice that that's happened. Gently let go of whatever you got caught up in. Bring the attention back to the body, the breath, or even the sense of sound to ground yourself once again in the present moment. Start all over again. I was feeling such a sense of joy towards the end of the meditation, just full body joy, just being present, being in the company of Sangha, just being in the moment, the simplicity of it. I guess I had kind of a busy day, so I needed that. So, as some of you know, something about me is I quite like quotes. I collect good Buddhist quotes and share them with Howie and anybody else that wants them. But I just take a lot of inspiration because, for one thing, I think other people usually put things better than I do. And I really love it when big ideas or truths are encapsulated in a very simple way. Like poetry, too, for the same reason. So I use a lot of quotes in my talks, and my talks are sometimes inspired by quotes, and that's the case this week. I heard a quote that I hadn't heard before. It just made me really happy. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was a contemporary of the Dalai Lama's, escaped from Tibet when the Chinese invaded, and he was asked at some point during probably a Q&A, Sangha like this, he was asked, what is the purpose of the Dharma? And Dilgi Khyentse Rinpoche replied, it's all about making the best of a bad situation. So the Dharma is for times like this. A bad situation could be anything from oppressive politics to floods and fires, or perhaps a scary diagnosis or loss of a loved one. One translation of dukkha, after all, is unreliability. Unreliable is a pretty good summation of the current state of affairs, don't you think? Dharma is not about trying to change the world, but rather altering our reactivity to a bad situation, or any situation. A lot of folks I know have been pondering, what should I do? And the Buddhist response is usually rather unsatisfying. Get back on the cushion. When we ask, what should I do? We're often talking about taking action to change or control some unsatisfactory condition. Suggestions for action are ubiquitous. They're easy to come by, if perhaps not so easy to implement. The Dharma recognizes that the first step in bringing about change is acceptance. It's like this. Acceptance does not mean passively accepting a bad situation. It's simply accepting that it exists. Now, you may think that this is obvious, but consider how often we resist some problematic situation by lamenting that we hate it and we just want it to go away. This is actually a fairly common reaction. Check it out in your own experience. But this attitude is not conducive to skillful action. In fact, it may leave us feeling hopeless and helpless. So I'm not here to advise you on what actions you should be taking to manage your dis-ease or the national dis-ease. There are sources better suited than me for that, and their suggestions are constantly being updated. Do what needs to be done according to your capacity and inclination. But in the meantime, attend to your own well-being and try to mirror that in a compassionate way for the benefit of others. That's a good place to start. You may have heard the story about the refugee boat lift that happened when Saigon fell at the end of the Vietnam War. Thousands of people got on whatever boats and rafts they could find in order to reach the American ships anchored offshore. And many of those boats, especially the tiny ones, were overloaded. And if their passengers panicked, they overturned and sank. But it was observed that if there was just one person on board who sat quietly meditating, that boat was more likely to remain upright and survive. The lesson that Thich Nhat Hanh drew from this story is this: if you want to help, be that person. The purpose of the Dharma is to make the best of a bad situation. And there you have it. As succinct a summation of why we practice as any. Of course, the word Dharma, or Dhamma, as it is in Pali, has a variety of meanings. It encompasses the teachings of the Buddha, which are really just a way of describing the nature of things. But it's also nature itself. Biology is Dharma. The laws of physics are Dharma. And Dharma is also the practice of bringing ourselves in harmony with the nature of reality, or the reality of nature. It seems to me that we could all benefit from grounding ourselves in reality in these crazy times. I'm certainly finding it helpful. I'm practicing more often nowadays, just for that. Because doesn't it seem like there's a generalized detachment from reality in our world? Just consider all the people walking down the streets while staring at their screens. We seem to have a preference for cognitive distraction over reality. Some say it's even an addiction. The problem is, once we detach from reality, we become easy to manipulate. In Buddhism, we call this delusion. One of the Buddha's radical insights that informed all of his subsequent teaching is that being in harmony with nature is not a cognitive activity. Practicing the Dharma is not about thinking in a different way. It's about seeing in a different way, including clearly seeing our habits of mind. This practice is more about getting in touch with our direct experience than intellectual achievement. The truth lies within, not out there. Reading books and listening to talks like this can be motivating and inspirational. But in the end, the Buddha said, it is in this fathom-long body with its perceptions in mind that you will find the world. He didn't tell us to read books or sit at the feet of a teacher. He advised us to find an empty hut or a remote tree to sit under and look within. Our own living rooms would do. The radical freedom practice that the Buddha recommended is meditation. Ajahn Chah was a mid-20th century Thai monk, said, "You are your own teacher. Looking for teachers can't solve your own doubts. Investigate yourself to find the truth. Inside, not outside. Knowing yourself is most important." This echoes the words of the 13th century Zen master Dogen, who advised us to cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate yourself. Hence, when in doubt, get back on the cushion. Sometimes when I give talks about meditation as a skillful response to difficulty, I'm called out by non-practitioners who perceive meditation as a mere navel-gazing that accomplishes nothing. They don't see the point of it. We Westerners, in particular, tend to think that if we're not busy doing something, if we're not producing or consuming, then we just must be wasting time. But Thich Nhat Hanh countered that. He said, meditation is not evasion, it's a serene encounter with reality. That's what we just did in our set. A serene encounter with reality. At least, I hope it was serene for you. Sometimes it's tumultuous. Buddhism holds that reality can only be experienced, as I said in the instructions, through our 6 sense doors. Seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and cognizing. Cognizing is a uniquely Buddhist addition to that universal list. It doesn't mean thinking, but rather the experience of noticing thoughts and feelings arising and passing away. In our direct experience at the present moment, fleeting thoughts arise uninvited and are met by consciousness in the same way that sounds arise uninvited and are met by the sense door of the ear. It all happens in a blink of an eye. Thinking, on the other hand, happens when we attach or cling to those thoughts or sounds. Thinking distracts our attention and lures us into the past or the future. Suddenly we find we're no longer present. We don't know how that happened. The Burmese teacher, U Tejaniya, notes that we tend to get lost in concepts. We need to see the difference between the concepts we use to create a convincing mental picture of reality and reality itself. Reality is always paired with the concepts that we lay over it. Craving and aversion pay attention to the concepts. Wisdom pays attention to reality. Delusion, which is one of the chief hindrances to awakening, is the subconscious act of mistaking the concepts we fabricate for reality. When you hear the Buddhists claim that we create the world, this is what they're referring to. The challenge is to clearly see the difference between reality and the world we fabricate through conceptualization. This is the wisdom practice of meditation. If you have a curious inclination, if you have a curious mind, it's really quite fascinating. And it's a lifelong study. The German monk and academic Anelio, who's one of my teachers, reminds us that meditation is not about creating any experience. It's about how we relate to experience. Too often, we think that meditation is about controlling our experience or achieving some desired state. This is not particularly skillful practice. As Adyashanti says, it's not what you think, it's much, much less. It's helpful in meditation practice to let go of our ideas about what we think is supposed to be happening, or maybe what we wish would be happening, and simply accepting whatever arises in our experience without prejudice. Simply receiving experience. Nothing could be simpler. After some 50 years of not very dedicated practice, I've come to the conclusion that most of my problems arise from overthinking, speculating, fearing, or fabricating meaning, which may or may not have a relationship with reality. One delusion that we often propagate is that reality is to be found somewhere outside of ourselves. We imagine that we are assaulted by world events, or interpersonal conflict, or illness, or old age. We blame our problems on outside circumstances rather than our own reactivity. But U Tejaniya points out that nobody outside of this mind can upset it, make it angry, averse, afraid, happy, joyful, or grateful. Nobody outside of the mind triggers it. The mind is responsible for its own feelings, gladness, and suffering. Or as Joseph Goldstein puts it, somewhat more bluntly, we are 100% responsible for our own suffering. This is the second noble truth, the origin of our dissatisfaction, the cause of suffering. You may have heard the Buddhist aphorism that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. But likewise, nobody can alleviate your suffering but you. Dharma teachers can point the way, but change only comes from within. If we are 100% responsible for our suffering, then we have agency about how much we suffer. This is good news. This is the key to freedom. If we can take responsibility for our own dissatisfaction, then we have the option to let go of it and accept whatever is bothering us as being like this. And then we can choose a more skillful response, one grounded in contentment rather than dissatisfaction. This is our task. We may not be able to control the pain, but we can have an effect on how much suffering we experience. That's certainly why I practice. I may have shared with you in a previous talk an insight that I had a few years ago during the pandemic. And one day I realized that when I complain, when I fan the flames of my own dissatisfaction and project that out into the world, all I'm doing is adding my own suffering to the world's. That's my contribution. It's also useful to reflect on the fact that simply complaining doesn't change much of anything, except maybe my mood, and not for the better. The Buddha summarized his message by saying, "I teach only suffering and the end of suffering." But he could have just as easily said, "I teach only happiness and the cultivation of happiness." One of the radical propositions of Dharma practice is that we can be happy no matter what is going on in our lives or the world. This is no small thing. Some Buddhist teachers hold that we have a responsibility to be happy. Mahagosananda was the head of the Buddhist order in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge genocide of the 1970s. Nearly all of his fellow monks, along with 25% of the country's population, were murdered in just the space of about 4 years. And yet, Gosananda was later quoted as saying, "If you can't be happy in spite of your troubles, what's the point of practice?" This outlook is shared by many famous Buddhist teachers who have witnessed great hardship, including the Dalai Lama and his contemporary Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. For them, happiness is not dependent on having the right conditions, or the right politics, or the right leadership. Happiness should be cultivated no matter what is going on in your life or the world. Happiness in our tradition arises from being free of the hindrances of greed, aversion, and delusion. Anyone can cultivate peace of mind and freedom, but you have to want to be free more than you want to perpetuate your habitual mind states, your stories, your identity. The quest for freedom is considered to be a skillful desire, and it's more about letting go than getting something. The Buddhist view is that dukkha should not be an obstacle to happiness. Because after all, dukkha, which is unreliability, is a characteristic of existence. You might say that dukkha is also nature. This is why Joseph Goldstein advises us to don't waste your dukkha. Or as the Tibetan Lojong saying goes, turn all obstacles into the path of practice. The unreliability of the world is particularly apparent in these times. Many of us are feeling a sense of vulnerability that arises out of that unreliability. And this in turn can turn into fear or anger. It's understandable that these feelings should arise. But we don't have to be overwhelmed. And we shouldn't put too much stock in what might happen in the future. When I find myself trying to predict the future, I remember the Buddha saying that whatever you imagine will happen will always be other than that. Whatever you imagine will happen will always be other than that. As I said, this doesn't mean passivity or passively accepting the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. It's skillful practice to be discerning, to attend to whatever bad situations we can change and accept, if only for the moment, those that we cannot change. And as the Serenity Prayer suggests, wisdom is knowing the difference. And if anyone still thinks that meditation is an evasion, I point to the example of the Japanese samurai. They were warriors, but they were also meditators. To prepare themselves for battle, they meditated in order to focus their attention on the task before them. Perhaps a more appropriate example is today's elite athletes who do the same thing. Meditation is being incorporated into training programs for anyone who wants to calm the body and sharpen the mind for whatever task is at hand. So if you're keeping your powder dry and are inclined to be a social justice warrior or a political warrior, a peaceful mind will support you in the struggle. And don't forget that meditation also opens the heart, allowing us to step away from our self-centered fog and have compassion for others, for all those who are challenged.
I mean, Steve was challenged. That sucks, dude. That sucks bad.
In our direct experience, we can see that all beings are interconnected. So by all means, do what needs to be done, but do it from a grounded reality of peace and calm. Sometimes that means being the rower or the bailer in the foundering boat rather than panicking. Sometimes it means being that single calm person, quietly making the best of a bad situation. So I'd like to close with a quote from the Saleka Sutta, the Buddha's words: "Others will be cruel. We shall be kind. Thus we will incline the heart. Others will speak falsely. We shall speak truth. Thus we will incline the heart. Others will exploit and steal. We shall be honest and generous. Thus we will incline the heart." Thank you for your kind attention. And may you find shelter from the storm. So we have some time for comments or questions or reflections. If you use the reactions to raise your hand, it's a little bit easier for me to spot you.
Someone is unmuted. Do you want to speak?
Yep, don't know who that is.
Guess not. It's a phone number.
That's okay. Wrong number. Anything up for you? Oh, Fred, please.
Hi, thank you, David. What a wonderful talk. I really appreciate that, and really timely. Um, that I mean, it was so rich. There were so many things that really touched me, especially in these uncertain times or these changing times. Um, but what you said really touched me about not complaining, about that it doesn't help anybody, it doesn't help anyone. And it seems like lately a lot of my friends, even Dharma friends, are complaining a lot, and yeah, and it's just really, I've just sort of really started to notice how that kind of wears me down and is not a helpful response. And yet it's such a habituated, reflexive sort of way to respond. And I don't know, I don't know if it's like misery loves company or something, but it's like, yeah, ain't it awful kind of piling on that happens with it. But taking the other way, this, like you were suggesting, um, like you're 100% responsible for the way for your happiness, right? So anyway, thank you for all of that. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Fred. Yeah, and I just want to say that I complain. I still complain too. I mean, sometimes you just need to gripe, but it usually doesn't make me feel better. It usually just gets me worked up. Nobody's perfect, but thank you for that, Fred. Joe, please.
Thank you, David. Actually, that reminds me of my 9 years in Catholic grade school in central Wisconsin. Your nobody's perfect comment. And it's kind of the reverse of that. It says, well, if you make a mistake, the last guy who was perfect, they crucified. So maybe that's not a good goal to aim for. And that leads you to my question or comment that you talk about happiness. And I mean, they've checked the depression box on me, and, that's part of being human too. But I just love jokes and humor. And it's so quick. I feel so disparaged and mocked, but not in a kind way, not in a humorous way, that I'm being frivolous when really I'd rather be frivolous than all all fucked up.
Yeah, sometimes there's power in humor, and sometimes it's a effective sword, humor. Uh, but there's also joy, and I read in the Chronicle about that Joan Baez gave a benefit concert in San Francisco a couple of nights ago with a bunch of old timers, a bunch of old hippie singers, like my age in their 70s. And although Joan Baez is in her 80s, but one of the points she made in speaking between songs is that we have a responsibility to be joyful now in this time, no matter what else is going on in your world. She called out for us to be joyful. Joyful is a way to be radical, to fight back. So I just wanted to share that. So,
I thank you.
yeah, thank you, Joe.
Hi.
Jill, please.
Oh,
Hi.
you reminded me of my favorite Wendell Berry quote.
Oh, what's that?
Be joyful though you've considered all the facts.
Oh, I don't know that one. Thank you for sharing it.
It's from his the Mad Farmers Liberation Manifesto that he wrote. And in
Uh-huh.
the middle of it, it says, "Be joyful though you've considered all the facts."
Yeah. That sounds like Wendell Berry. He's one of my heroes. Read most of his books. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and please don't feel guilty about feeling happy or being joyful in these times, because someone is always suffering someplace, and someone's also always joyful someplace. So let's be part of spreading more joy in the world rather than misery. There's quite enough misery as it is.
David, I wonder if you could speak to what I've been hearing and feeling to some degree is a sense of overwhelm and powerlessness, and kind of how to respond to that.
Yeah, well, that was kind of an undertone in my talk. Overwhelm, for me, overwhelm and powerlessness comes from maybe a subconscious idea that we should be controlling things, or that things should be controlled, and it's not working. So for me, the answer to overwhelm and powerlessness is just to first accept the situation as it is. Like, oh, it's like this. I don't like what's going on, maybe, but it's going on. And maybe right now I don't have, I can't control it. But by accepting it, we let go of that sense that we should be doing something, we should be controlling something. I quoted this kind of passively. I quoted the Serenity Prayer in my talk, and I find that to be a wonderful formula. It's one of the most Buddhist expressions that I know, even though it's not Buddhist at all. Grant me the serenity to accept things that I cannot change, and the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But the first line, the emphasized line in the Serenity Prayer is, grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change. And I think that's makes us kind of uncomfortable. We want to dig in and change things and fix things and make it right. That's the American way. But sometimes that's just not possible. And I'm not just talking about politics, it might be some situation in our own lives, like a disease or a health condition. Just accept that, oh, okay, it's like this. We do our best. And beyond that, we just accept that this is the way it is. And that's leads to peace of mind. Well, for me. So overwhelm, it's a signal to let go, I think. So thanks for that question.
Thank you.
I agree, a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed, and a lot of us are feeling vulnerable. And that's a reasonable emotional response to unreliability, which is dukkha. It's like the sand is always shifting underneath your feet. We don't know what's going to happen next. And one of the things that I've been saying is that in the news nowadays is every single day it's a new insult. And by insult, I mean insult like medical insult. It's we get poked, and that requires a response of a patience. And also, when the time comes, I think we'll know what to do to respond. Howie actually said to me a while back, I think maybe right after the election, Howie said, yeah, he said, I think we're in a bardo time. In the Tibetan tradition, bardos are that period between dying and going on to another life or going on to heaven. It's a kind of resting time of collecting yourself, and before you're in between states. That's might be what we're in right now, is a bardo time. We don't know what to do yet. but we will. Things will change. We just don't know what it will be. And that requires a lot of accepting and patience and things that we Americans are not very good at. Eugene, please. Hi.
Hi. First of all, thanks for the talk. It was really great. Um, there was something that just came to my mind, which was that the first thing that comes to mind when I think of when I hear acceptance is sort of like accepting kind of like something that's shitty, that's like bad, that I'd rather not accept it. Like I'd rather um like it's an upsetting thing. But that's what comes to mind is like a negative thing, like accepting negativity. Like I'm accepting challenge and pain that I could possibly avoid.
Yeah.
But I feel like what just clicked with me for a second was just that acceptance, it's like accepting, it's also accepting like the positivity. Like for example, with like the world right now, like a lot of things are not so great. But honestly, I mean, I feel like that comes along with a lot of things that are really great. Like a lot of the like people are addicted to their phones. But why? Because that brings a lot of connection. Like people are more connected than they've ever been before. There's more access to information and more like quality of life in a lot of sense. Um, just like some examples. But like that's also part of the, you know, um, acceptance equation that makes it, I feel like if those can be sort of like combined, it feels like a little bit more palatable to accept.
Yeah, I agree with you. Accepting everything, the good and the bad. I think it's a little bit easier for us to accept what's pleasant in our world than what's unpleasant, which is why I kind of put the emphasis on the unpleasant. When you're experiencing something pleasant, acceptance just kind of automatically happens. Like, oh, this is good. I like this. But yeah, um, I've often thought that the concept of intersectionality focuses too much on negative things or on trauma, and it should include everything, all the good things that have happened to our lives, in our lives, our teachers, our mentors, our good health. So yes, it's a balance. So thanks for sharing that, Eugene.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you had over-focused on the negative, but more that was my kind of
No, that was
perception.
intentional. I was focusing on the negative. So that was a good reminder, and a welcome one. Yeah. Anyone else? We should probably, Catherine, right, be moving to announcements maybe at this point.
Sure. Thank you, David. That was an incredible talk. Thank you so much. So for announcements, really just that Howie hopes to be back next week, as David told us at the beginning, and keep sending him your thoughts and meta and practice. And I've put how to offer Donna in the chat. If anyone, I'll just go through it really quickly. Mission Dharma appreciates and relies on your generosity. No one's turned away for lack of funds. And you can donate via PayPal, via Venmo, Interac if you're in Canada, or you can write a check and send it to Mission Dharma, and the address is in the chat. And thanks everyone for your support and for coming to Sangha. I know I feel very supported by everyone's presence.
We're all just walking each other home. So let's just take a moment and dedicate our practice, the merit of our practice. May all beings be safe and protected in the same way that we want to be safe and protected ourselves. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. May they live with peace and ease. May they find shelter from the storm. May it be so. Thanks for joining, everyone. Be well.
Thank you so much.
David.
Thank you, David. Goodbye.
David.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so
David.
much, David.
Thanks everyone for
Good
being
night, all. Thank you, David.
Good night.
here.
Thank you, David.